Have you ever replayed a conversation with your teen and thought, how did that blow up so fast? I was only asking a question. And yet here you are again, feeling discouraged, disconnected, and maybe even a little afraid to bring things up next time. Welcome to the Momentum Podcast, moving moms closer to Jesus and families closer together. I'm your host, Erica Wiggenhorn, and this is part 2 of our first episode. Why does every conversation turn into a fight? In part 1, we talked about why this season feels so volatile and what's actually happening beneath the surface and how God meets us right in the middle of these hard conversations. I confessed my 4 common reactions as a mom in this season: isolate, fixate, manipulate, and vacate, and why none of those default reactions actually worked. But today, in part 2, I want to lay out some strategies that did work. And if you find the tension with your teen or young adult unbearable, the conversations growing increasingly volatile, or maybe distant because you feel yourself just shutting down when you try and interact with them, I think you'll find some good tools today to put in your tool chest when it comes to communication with your teen and your adult child. But before we dive into these strategies, I want to remind you that you can download a free companion guide to go along with this podcast series that will help you keep this information all organized and readily accessible to you. Why don't you pause this episode for just a minute and make sure you go grab that companion guide because you're going to want it later. It's From Despair to Repair, Hope for the Hurting Mother's Heart. And it's going to outline all of the information that I'm going to give you in this podcast episode. Because here's the thing. This is not about information. This is about transformation. It's inviting God into our hard situations. And so that's going to require a little time of reflection and some follow-up time with talking to God about how you feel and some of the things that I shared in this episode. And that companion guide is going to do that, exactly that. It's going to guide you through that process. So let's talk about maybe some strategies that you have tried in the past. First of all, I want to talk about a common strategy that you will hear out in therapy circles and why it doesn't work, and that is silence. Silence doesn't work because what it communicates to your child is that you really don't desire connection. We have to learn to pursue connection in a calmer manner. We've got to be balanced. We've got to learn to be balanced. A lot of experts out there are going to tell you, keep your mouth shut, keep your opinions to yourself, don't share what you feel, don't tell them your opinion. There is a time and a space to keep our opinions to ourselves as mothers. We don't need to let every thought in our head roll off our tongue. That is definitely good advice, but here's where it becomes bad advice. When our kids are reaching out to us and they are telling us things that are happening in their lives or decisions that they're making or things that they are doing, they are telling us those things for a reason. If they did not want to hear anything from us about the subject, they would not bring the subject up. So when they are being vulnerable enough and brave enough to bring something up to us and they are just met with silence and icy stares, their assumption is going to be that you disagree or that you disapprove. And that assumption may be correct, but they're not going to feel any level of support in the process. And maybe sometimes the best thing to say, the only thing to say is, tell me more about that. I'd like to know how you arrived at that decision or reached that conclusion. You're keeping your opinion out, but you're not staying silent. You're inviting a conversation and you're inviting connection. Adolescents especially are craving autonomy. They are craving independence. And so when they stop talking to us about a lot of things, it's not personal rejection. It's them trying to figure out, can I actually figure out life on my own? Can I actually make decisions without mom and dad making every decision for me? If you're like me, I like to give a lecture on why all of my opinions were so valuable and should be heeded, but lectures just increased defensiveness because what my adolescent or my teen heard in those lectures is, no, you're not capable of making your own decisions. You're not capable of arriving at the right conclusions. And I don't trust you to process this situation effectively without my input. Now, imagine if you went to work every day and heard that message from your boss, or you sat down to make a decision with your spouse every day and heard that message from your husband or wife. How would you feel about your relationship with them? Our adolescents may be acting inhuman at times. It may feel like as moms, but they are human beings and they have thoughts and they have feelings and they have things that are very important to them. And silence doesn't bring those things out. And neither does a lecture, Mama. Ask me how I know. Here's the truth. Reflective listening, emotional validation, and collaborative problem solving can help us have conversations with our teen or our young adult where both people can be heard. And we're going to walk through what that looks like in this episode. Here's the research. The research actually says that parental involvement, positive communication, a level of supervision of parents over children actually results in greater and more positive development in your teen. The research does not support that mom and dad advocating their influence and vacating and being silent and no longer speaking actually helps our teen or young adult. Research does not show that. It might diffuse some tension in the moment, but in the long run, it doesn't help them. Research also shows that conflict is going to escalate really, really quickly when one or the other person feels disrespected. Our teens are wanting us to view them as being able to make more decisions on their own and having a brain and having thoughts that matter and opinions that are valid. And we don't always have to agree with everything that they think and everything that they feel, but acknowledging that they have opinions and they have feelings goes a long way, even if we don't fully agree with what they're thinking. I'll be candid. There are times when I would have conversations with my teens or young adults and they would talk about something and how they thought about it or how they felt about it. And I would literally be thinking in my head, I cannot believe you think that way. That is not at all how I raised you. Where in heaven's name did you ever get that idea? I thought those things. I thought those things more than once, but I didn't voice those things. Instead, I would ask, that's really interesting to hear your point of view. Tell me more about how you arrived at that conclusion. I never said whether I agreed or disagreed, but I continued to invite them into a conversation. Here's the third part: collaboration in decision making. Research shows that when we collaborate with our children in arriving at a decision over something, it communicates mutual respect, and it gives our children an opportunity to work out their problem-solving and decision-making skills. So when we just jump in and say, here's what you're going to do, and here's why you're going to do it, end of discussion, I don't want to talk about this anymore, we've actually robbed ourselves and our children of the opportunity to work through a process of arriving at a good decision and thinking through, why is this a good decision? So we're going to talk about what that looks like in just a minute. But here's something that I want us to focus on and have in the back of our mind. God's authority never disconnects relationship. God's authority in our life actually covers us with his grace and invites us to come closer to him. That doesn't mean that God doesn't ever allow us to experience consequences, and that doesn't mean that God doesn't ever speak in a way where he says, do this, don't do that in his word. But ultimately, God's authority invites connection with him. It invites closeness with him. And so whenever we're coming in hard and hot and fast with our children, saying this is how it's going to be and why, we need to temper that with a message of grace and invite them into the conversation. Invite them to respond. How does that make you feel? Tell me what you're hearing and feeling when I communicate this hard and fast rule to you. Connection. Do you hear that pattern in everything that I'm saying? Connection. But here's what we can hold on to. There's a study that actually came out of UCLA, and it proved that when parents stay connected and provide structure, not throw out every rule, not throw out every consequence, there's some structure, but there's good communication, teens have better odds, much better odds, of navigating risk and stress well. So how do we do this, right? That's the burning question. Like, okay, that sounds great. How do I do it? I'm going to teach you a conversational technique to have with your teen or adolescent, and it's called the reflect, then ask method. Okay. Now, my mom was the master at this, but this is kind of how it went. Okay. I would be having a bad day. I would be really upset about something, and I would come in and just be, there's really only one word to describe it: a brat. I would be a total brat to my mom. And my mom would say something like this to me: it seems like you're feeling upset. It sounds like you're dealing with some anger over something. She would give voice to an emotion. She would not judge my behavior. She would not criticize what I said. She would just try to frame my state of mind and my emotional state. And then that would generally open the floodgates for me to just start pouring out what had happened, what I was upset about, how I was feeling, what I was not understanding, whatever it was I was facing as a teen or as a young adult. And she would respond with this ask: do you want me to listen, or do you want my advice? Do you want me to just listen, or do you want me to help you solve this problem? and she would stop there. Now, being raised with a wise mother who employed this technique with me during my teen and young adult years, you would think that I would have learned to employ this reflect then ask technique as a mother. But unfortunately, I did not. My kids would complain about something. Maybe they would complain about a teacher, or they would complain about a friend or another friend's mom, or they would complain about my husband or complain about me. And my reaction, I would immediately jump in and try to justify the other person's behavior. Well, maybe they were just having a bad day. Well, maybe you weren't listening in class the way you should have. Well, maybe you made your dad angry because you made him feel disrespected. And I would try to justify the other person's behavior rather than try to connect with my child over how they were feeling. And then I would do a second thing, is I would immediately jump in and tell them how to fix it, instead of just listening to them. Man, did I learn this the hard way. I'll never forget one day my daughter, with just tear-filled eyes, looked at me and she said, "Mom, why is it every time I try to tell you how I feel, you always tell me how it's my fault?" Whoa. That hit my heart like a ton of bricks. I thought I was trying to be helpful. I thought I was giving her a broader perspective or a different perspective. Instead, I was telling her that every time she felt sad or hurt or rejected or left out or whatever, it was her own fault. Man, this reflect then ask is so powerful with your child. First of all, it's going to teach them that you really want connection, and they can come to you in a no judgment zone. You recognize that they need a safe place to unload, and you're not going to step in with your amazing mom advice unless they're ready to hear it. Here's some hope for you, Mama. Some of you may or may not know that I write for Proverbs 31 Ministries. I write and teach on their First 5 app, and we often have meetings with Dr. Joel Mutamali, and he will teach us an overview of whatever book of the Bible or theological topic that we're going to teach on in that month. And one day he said something that just brought my heart so much hope, and I hope it encourages you. He said, "Your child is never far from God." There's no person on earth that is ever far from God. Even when God allowed his people to go into exile or sent them into exile as punishment, God went with his people into exile so that he could bring them back out again. And so your child is not far from God. I used that term often with my child. You know, people would be like, "Oh, how are your kids doing?" And I'd be like, "Well, one of them is really far from God." The reality is that God is always with our children. He is always right there with our children, and he's right there with us. And that means that in those heated moments of conversation where things are escalating, a fight is brewing, or maybe all out war has erupted in your kitchen or your living room, here's the thing. God is right there and ready to help us and ready to bring us out of these difficult conversations into new places of promise. So just keep showing up in your time with God. Your time with God to process your emotions that you're feeling and the fears that you're facing. These moments with God are going to be the most transformative moments in your heart and life, preparing you for those conversations with your child. Listen to today's scripture from Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted in the nations. I will be exalted in all the earth. God is with you. God is over you, and God is able to change the dynamic of your conversation with your child and help you reflect and then ask. I'm Erica Wiggenhorn, host of the Momentum podcast and author of Loving Your Wayward Child, a Christian guide to stand in faith and build connection when their choices break your heart. Mama, your influence isn't gone, but it is changing, and we've got to get our emotions in check so we can keep our conversations under control and focus on connection rather than drawing battle lines of division. And even when the path forward is unclear, God is faithful and God is moving. I'll be back next week with the second 2-part episode in our Momentum podcast series, and we'll take a look at some signs when we're parenting out of fear, which may be driving a lot of that escalation, and how to tamp down that fear and make faith-based decisions instead. If volatile conversations are part of your parenting experience, uncovering some fears may be just the next step you need to bring calm to your conversations. Be sure and subscribe so you don't miss anything, and download your free ebook, Prayers Moms Pray When Parenting is Hard. I'll put both of those links in the show notes for you to easily grab. Let me close in prayer. Lord, you see the tension in our homes and the ache in our hearts. And when words fail and emotions run high, remind us that you are steady and near. Help us respond with wisdom, patience, and love that reflects your heart. Thank you that your mercies are new every morning. We trust you with our children and with ourselves. In Jesus' name, amen. Until next time, may you move closer to Jesus and watch him move your family closer together. Thank you for joining us today on Momentum.